An elderly man living on a modest pension decides to give his last $20 to his struggling grandson, only to be cruelly rejected and humiliated. The grandson's harsh words about keeping poverty away devastate the old man, but the next day brings an unexpected revelation that will change both their lives forever and teach a powerful lesson about family, dignity, and the true meaning of wealth. I stared at the crumpled $20 bill in my weathered hands, feeling its worn edges between my fingertips. It was Thursday morning, and this was all I had left until my Social Security check arrived next week. At 73, I'd learned to stretch every dollar, to make coffee last 3 days, and to find dinner in a can of soup that cost 89 cents. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the phone call I'd received the night before. Grandpa Joe? The voice had been barely above a whisper, trembling with something I recognized all too well: desperation. It's Marcus. Marcus, my grandson, my only grandson, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle in this very driveway 20 years ago, the kid who used to spend summers here, helping me tend to my small vegetable garden and listening to my stories about the old days when I worked at the steel mill. "What's wrong, son?" I'd asked, though I could already hear the answer in his shaky breathing. I messed up, Grandpa, really bad this time. Really. I owe some people money, and they're not the kind of people who wait around for payment plans. The story that followed made my heart sink deeper with every word. Marcus had been gambling again, despite promising his mother, my daughter Sarah, that he'd stopped. He'd gotten in deep with some local bookies, the kind who didn't just break legs as a warning anymore. The kind who made people disappear. "How much?" I'd whispered into the phone, though I already knew my meager resources couldn't possibly cover whatever astronomical sum he owed. "5 grand, he'd choked out. "I know it's a lot, Grandpa, but I didn't know who else to call. Mom doesn't have it, and Dad, well, you know how things are with Dad." I knew. Sarah's husband had walked out 3 years ago, leaving her with nothing but debt and a son who'd inherited his father's weakness for easy money and hard luck. Now, standing in my small kitchen with its faded yellow wallpaper and the ancient refrigerator that hummed like a dying bee, I looked at that $20 bill and made a decision that would have seemed crazy to anyone else. But when you're a grandfather, when you love someone more than your own comfort, crazy starts to look a lot like necessary. I'd called Marcus back that morning. "I'm coming over," I'd told him. "I've got something for you." The bus ride to his apartment complex took 45 minutes and cost me $3.50 in fare. Money I couldn't really afford to spend. But as I sat in that plastic seat, watching Detroit's struggling neighborhoods roll past the window, I thought about all the times Marcus had needed me over the years, when he'd scraped his knee learning to skateboard, when his parents had fought so loudly that he'd hidden under my kitchen table, tears streaming down his 8-year-old face, when he'd graduated high school, and I was the only one who showed up because his father was too drunk, and his mother was working a double shift to keep food on the table. Marcus lived in a rundown complex on the east side, the kind of place where you kept your eyes down and walked fast. Paint peeled from the building's exterior like diseased skin, and the hallways smelled of cigarettes, mildew, and broken dreams. I climbed 3 flights of stairs, my arthritic knees protesting with every step, until I reached apartment 3C. I knocked softly. "Marcus, it's Grandpa Joe." The door opened, and my heart nearly broke all over again. The young man standing there barely resembled the bright-eyed kid I remembered. Marcus had always been thin, but now he looked gaunt, almost skeletal. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he gripped the doorframe. He was 28 years old but looked 40, worn down by bad choices and worse luck. "Grandpa," he said, his voice hollow, "you didn't have to come all this way." "Course I did," I replied, stepping into his sparse apartment. The place was barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a small TV on a plastic crate, and empty takeout containers scattered across a card table that served as his dining room. The smell of stale food and desperation hung heavy in the air. Marcus closed the door behind me and leaned against it, as if he could keep the world's problems from following us inside. "I feel like such a failure, Grandpa. 28 years old, and I can't even keep my life together for 5 minutes." I wanted to tell him he wasn't a failure, that everyone makes mistakes, that there was still time to turn things around. But looking at him now, seeing the hollow resignation in his eyes, I knew he'd heard all those words before. What he needed wasn't more empty reassurance. He needed hope. He needed to know that someone still believed in him, even when he'd stopped believing in himself. "I brought you something," I said quietly, reaching into my jacket pocket. Marcus looked up, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of that little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting that Grandpa Joe could fix anything. I pulled out the $20 bill and held it toward him. I know it's not much. I know it's not even close to what you need, but it's everything I have until next week, and I want you to take it. Marcus stared at the money as if I'd just offered him a live snake. His face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then something darker that I didn't recognize. $20, he said, his voice getting louder. You came all the way over here to give me $20? Marcus, I know it's not. I owe $5,000 to people who will literally kill me if I don't pay up, and you're offering me 20. His voice cracked with hysteria, and he began pacing the small space like a caged animal. I kept the money extended toward him, my hand steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. Son, it's all I have, but maybe we can figure something out together. Maybe we can... Marcus spun around to face me, and the look in his eyes made me take a step back. It was a look of pure rage mixed with something worse: contempt. There is no we, old man. There's just me, about to get my legs broken because my grandfather thinks $20 lousy is going to save my life. The words hit me like physical blows, but I tried to keep my voice calm. Marcus, please, I'm just trying to help. I know it's not enough, but nothing, he shouted, his face flushing red. You want to help? Then stay out of my life. Keep your poverty away from me. The silence that followed was deafening. Those words, keep your poverty away from me, hung in the air like a curse. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for the past 73 years. Marcus seemed to realize what he'd said, because his face went pale and he took a step toward me. Grandpa, I didn't mean... But I was already turning toward the door, my legs suddenly feeling more fragile than they had in years. The $20 bill fluttered to the floor as my numb fingers released it. Grandpa, wait, Marcus called after me, but I was already in the hallway, walking as fast as my old bones would carry me. I made it to the stairwell before the tears started. 73 years old, and I was crying like a child, my chest heaving with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than my lungs. I gripped the railing and forced myself to keep moving, one step at a time, until I was outside in the cold Detroit air. The bus ride home was a blur. I sat in that plastic seat, staring out the window at the same struggling neighborhoods, but now they looked different. Now they looked like reflections of my own failure. I'd raised that boy, loved him, supported him through every crisis, and in the end all I was to him was poverty to be kept away. Back in my small house, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the empty space where that $20 bill had been. It wasn't much money. Hell, it wouldn't even buy a decent meal these days. But it had been everything I had, and I'd offered it freely, with love, with the desperate hope that somehow it might help. Instead, it had become a weapon used against me by the person I loved most in the world. I thought about calling Sarah, but what would I tell her? That her son had looked me in the eye and told me to keep my poverty away from him. That the grandson I'd helped raise saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment, a reminder of everything he didn't want to become. As the sun set outside my kitchen window, painting the small room in shades of gold and orange, I made myself a cup of coffee with the grounds I'd already used twice that week. It tasted weak and bitter, but it was warm, and warmth was something I could still afford. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything would change. That the phone call I would receive the next morning would turn my understanding of my grandson, and myself, completely upside down. But that night, sitting alone in my kitchen with my weak coffee and wounded heart, all I could think about were those 5 words that had cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever endured. Keep your poverty away from me. Some wounds, I thought, never really heal. They just teach you to live with the bleeding. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus's voice echoing in my head, keep your poverty away from me. The words had burned themselves into my memory like a brand, and no amount of tossing and turning could make them fade. By 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely. I shuffled to my kitchen in my worn slippers and threadbare robe, the same one Sarah had given me for Christmas 5 years ago. The fabric was thin now, more holes than cloth, but it still carried the faint scent of the lavender detergent I used to make it last longer between washes. I made coffee with fresh grounds, a luxury I allowed myself only on the worst days, when the weight of the world felt too heavy to bear with reused coffee. As I waited for it to brew, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. 73 years stared back at me, deep lines carved by decades of hard work, thin gray hair that never seemed to lay flat anymore. and eyes that looked older than they should have. Was this what Marcus saw when he looked at me? Just an old man in a shabby robe, a living reminder of everything he feared becoming. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured myself a cup, inhaling the rich aroma. It was one of the few pleasures I had left. Real coffee, hot and strong, drunk while watching the sunrise paint my small backyard in shades of gold and pink. My garden was mostly dormant now, just brown stalks and empty soil waiting for spring, but I could still see the ghost of what it had been during the summer months. Tomatoes heavy on the vine, green beans climbing their wooden stakes, the small patch of herbs that Marcus used to help me tend. He'd been maybe 10 years old the first time I'd taught him to plant seeds. His small hands had been so careful, so gentle with the tiny seedlings, and when the first tomatoes had ripened, his face had lit up like Christmas morning. "Look, Grandpa Joe," he'd shouted, holding up a perfect red tomato. "We grew this, we actually grew this." That memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. The little boy who'd been so proud of growing vegetables with his grandfather had become a man who saw that same grandfather as something shameful, something to be pushed away. I was still sitting at my kitchen table, lost in these painful memories, when the phone rang at 7:30. The sudden sound made me jump, coffee sloshing over the rim of my cup and onto the table. I wiped it up with a dish towel before answering, assuming it would be a telemarketer or maybe the doctor's office confirming an appointment. "Hello?" I said, my voice still rough from a sleepless night. "Is this Joseph Martinez?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, with the kind of crisp authority that usually meant bad news. My first thought was that something had happened to Marcus, that his gambling debts had caught up with him in the worst possible way. "Yes, this is Joe Martinez," I replied, gripping the phone tighter. "Is everything all right?" "Mr. Martinez, my name is David Richardson. I'm an attorney with Richardson, Walsh & Associates. I represent the estate of your late brother, Robert Martinez." I nearly dropped the phone. Robert, Bobby, my younger brother by 3 years. We hadn't spoken in over 20 years, not since the big fight that had torn our family apart. The last I'd heard, he was living somewhere in California, but that information was a decade old at least. I didn't know Robert had passed," I managed to say. "When did this happen?" "Approximately 6 months ago, Mr. Martinez. I apologize for the delay in contacting you, but locating you proved challenging. Your brother left very specific instructions about his estate, and I'm calling because you're named as his sole beneficiary." The words seemed to float in the air around me, making no sense. Bobby had left me something? After 20 years of silence, after the bitter words we'd exchanged the last time we'd spoken, he'd remembered me in his will. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake," I said. "My brother and I we hadn't spoken in years. We had a falling out, and I understand this might come as a surprise, Mr. Martinez, but there's no mistake. Your brother was quite clear in his instructions. In fact, he left a letter for you that I'm required to deliver, along with the inheritance documents. Would it be possible for me to meet with you today to discuss the details?" My head was spinning. Bobby was dead, and somehow impossibly he'd left me something. But what could it be? The last time I'd seen my brother, he'd been struggling just as much as I was, working odd jobs and barely keeping his head above water. How much are we talking about?" I asked, feeling foolish for even wondering. "Probably a few $100s, maybe some old photographs or family mementos." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when the lawyer spoke again, his voice was carefully measured. "Mr. Martinez, I think this conversation would be better had in person. Would this afternoon be convenient? I can drive up from the city. I understand you're in Detroit." Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. Lawyers didn't drive 3 hours to deliver a few $100s and some old pictures. "Yes, I'm in Detroit, but Mr. Richardson, I need to know, is this substantial enough that I should I call someone? My daughter, maybe?" Another pause. "Mr. Martinez, without going into specifics over the phone, I can tell you that your brother's estate is quite substantial. Life-changing, you might say. I think you'll want to be sitting down when we discuss the details." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone for a long time. Life-changing, what did that even mean? And how had Bobby, my little brother who'd always been just as broke as me, managed to accumulate anything substantial? I thought back to our last conversation, the fight that had driven us apart. It had been about money, of course. Money and pride and the kind of stubborn family loyalty that can turn toxic when mixed with desperation. I'd needed help badly, and I'd swallowed my pride to ask Bobby for a loan. $500 to keep the electricity from being shut off. to keep food in Sarah's mouth when she was still a teenager living at home. Bobby had said no, not because he didn't have it, but because he thought I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet instead of always looking for handouts. The conversation had escalated quickly, old resentments pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. We'd both said things that couldn't be taken back, and when I'd slammed the phone down that night, I'd promised myself I'd never speak to him again, and I hadn't. Not even when Sarah graduated high school, not when Marcus was born, not through all the birthdays and holidays and small moments that should have been shared between brothers. Pride was a terrible thing sometimes. It kept you warm when you had nothing else, but it also kept you alone. Now Bobby was gone, and I'd never get the chance to apologize, to tell him that the money hadn't mattered as much as having my brother back. But somehow, impossibly, he'd thought of me at the end. He'd made sure I was taken care of, even after 20 years of silence. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to distract myself with small tasks, washing dishes, organizing the medicine cabinet, sweeping the front porch, but my mind kept circling back to the phone call. Life-changing, the lawyer had said. What did that mean for someone like me? Someone who'd been living on $1,100 a month in Social Security. At noon, I made myself a sandwich with the last of my bologna and sat at the kitchen table trying to eat despite the knot in my stomach. That's when I heard the car door slam outside. Through my front window, I could see a black sedan parked at my curb and a man in an expensive suit walking up my front path. David Richardson was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from dealing with large sums of money on a regular basis. He carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. "Mr. Martinez," he said, extending his hand when I opened the door. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." I led him to my small living room, suddenly conscious of how shabby everything must look to someone who clearly lived in a different world. The furniture was old but clean, the carpet worn but vacuumed, the walls decorated with family photos in frames I'd bought at the dollar store. It was a humble life, but it was honest. Richardson sat in my recliner and opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder of documents. "Before we discuss the specifics of your brother's estate, he asked me to give you this." He handed me an envelope, yellowed with age, with my name written on it in Bobby's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and I had to blink several times to bring the words into focus. "Joey," it began, using the childhood nickname only he had ever called me. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and David is doing what I paid him to do. I know we haven't talked in 20 years, and I know that's mostly my fault. I was too proud, too stubborn, too afraid to admit that I was wrong that night when you called asking for help. You were my big brother, and you needed me, and I let you down. I've regretted it every day since." I had to stop reading. The words blurred as tears I'd been holding back since yesterday finally broke free. Richardson quietly handed me a box of tissues from his briefcase, as if this was a routine part of his job. "If this moment touches something deep in your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this story. Sometimes the most unexpected gifts come wrapped in the pain we thought would never heal." I wiped my eyes and continued reading Bobby's letter, knowing that whatever came next would change everything about the life I thought I'd be living for the rest of my days. I took a shaky breath and continued reading Bobby's letter, each word feeling like a message from beyond the grave. "The thing is, Joey, I got lucky, really lucky. After our fight, I was so angry and hurt that I packed up everything and drove to California with nothing but my old truck and about $300 to my name. I was going to show everyone, that I could make it on my own without family, without help from anyone. I ended up in Silicon Valley in 1995, right when everything was starting to explode with computers and the internet. I didn't know anything about technology, but I was willing to work harder than anyone else. I started as a janitor at a little startup company, cleaning offices at night, listening to these young guys talk about their big dreams and crazy ideas. One night, I was emptying trash cans when I heard 2 of the founders arguing about needing investors. They were brilliant kids, but they didn't have any money, and the banks thought their idea was too risky. I don't know what got into me, but I walked up to them and said I'd give them my life savings, all $300, if they'd let me be part of whatever they were building. They laughed at first. $300 was nothing to them, barely enough to buy pizza for a week. But something about the old janitor who believed in them enough to risk everything must have touched them, because they said yes. They gave me a tiny piece of the company, so small it was basically worthless. That company was Google, Joey. Those two kids were Larry Page and Sergey Brin. My $300 investment, plus the additional shares they gave me over the years as the company grew, is now worth $68 million. I had to put the letter down. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the paper steady. $68 million. The numbers seemed impossible, like something from a dream or a movie, not something that could be connected to my life in any real way. Richardson watched me carefully, his expression kind but professional. "Are you all right, Mr. Martinez? Would you like some water?" I nodded, and he went to my kitchen, returning with a glass of water that I drained in 3 large gulps. The cold liquid helped clear my head enough to pick up the letter again. "I know what you're thinking, Joey. Why didn't I call? Why didn't I share this with you, with Sarah, with the family? The truth is I was still angry for the first few years. Then I was embarrassed. How do you call your brother after 10 years of silence and say, 'Hey, remember when you needed $500 and I told you to stand on your own feet?' Well, now I'm worth millions." As the years went on, it got harder and harder to make that call. I told myself I'd do it tomorrow, next month, next year. I kept putting it off until suddenly 20 years had passed, and I realized I was dying of cancer, and it was too late for phone calls. But it's not too late for this. It's not too late to take care of my big brother the way I should have been doing all along. The money is yours now, Joey. All of it. Do something good with it. Help people the way I should have helped you. And tell Sarah and Marcus that their Uncle Bobby loved them, even if he was too much of a coward to show it. I'm sorry, brother. I hope this can be enough. Love, Bobby. I set the letter down on my coffee table and leaned back in my chair, feeling like the world had tilted on its axis. 24 hours ago, I'd been a man with $20 to his name, offering his last penny to a grandson who'd rejected it with cruel words. Now, I was apparently worth $68 million. Richardson cleared his throat gently. "I know this is a lot to process, Mr. Martinez. Your brother spent considerable time ensuring that the inheritance would transfer smoothly. The money is currently in a trust, but once we complete the paperwork, you'll have full access to the funds." $68 million, I whispered, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I can't even comprehend that much money." "Your brother also left detailed instructions about how he hoped you might use the inheritance," Richardson continued, pulling out another document. "He established several charitable foundations that he'd like you to consider supporting, but ultimately the money is yours to do with, as you see fit." I thought about Marcus, about the $5,000 he desperately needed, about the cruel words he'd spoken because he was scared and desperate, and facing the kind of people who hurt you when you couldn't pay your debts. $5,000, an amount that had seemed impossibly large yesterday, was now less than pocket change, but the money wasn't what hit me hardest. It was Bobby's words, the regret that had eaten at him for 20 years, the same regret that was now eating at me about my grandson. Pride and stubbornness had cost me my relationship with my brother, and now the same forces were threatening to destroy my relationship with Marcus. "Mr. Richardson," I said slowly, "how quickly can this be finalized? How soon before I can access the money? Given that your brother prepared everything in advance, we could have the initial transfers completed within 48 hours. The full estate will take longer, perhaps a few weeks, but I can arrange for immediate access to several $million if needed. Several $million, available in 2 days." I thought about Marcus's terror-filled voice on the phone, about the dangerous people he owed money to, about the way desperation had twisted him into someone I barely recognized. "There's something I need to do," I said. "Someone I need to help." Richardson nodded. "Of course, but Mr. Martinez, if I may offer some advice. Sudden wealth can be overwhelming, and it often brings out unexpected behaviors in people, even family members. You might want to consider taking some time to process this before making any major decisions." I understood what he was really saying. He'd probably seen it before. Lottery winners and inheritance recipients who got taken advantage of by relatives and friends who suddenly came out of the woodwork. But Marcus wasn't some distant cousin looking for a handout. He was my grandson, the little boy who'd helped me plant tomatoes, who'd looked at me with such trust and love before life had beaten that trust out of him. "I appreciate the advice," I said, "but this is something I have to do." After Richardson left, promising to call the next morning with updates on the paperwork, I sat in my living room holding Bobby's letter and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. 2 days ago, my biggest worry was making my Social Security check last until the end of the month. Now I was wealthy beyond any dream I'd ever dared to have, but with the money came a crushing sense of loss. Bobby was gone, and I'd never get the chance to reconcile with him. All those years we could have been brothers again, all those holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments we could have shared, lost forever, because we were both too proud to pick up the phone. I wasn't going to make the same mistake with Marcus. I called Sarah first. My daughter deserved to know what had happened before she heard it from anyone else. When I told her about Bobby's death and the inheritance, she was quiet for a long time. "Dad," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "I can't believe Uncle Bobby's gone. I can't believe he thought about us all these years but never called." "Pride's a terrible thing sometimes, sweetheart," I said. "It keeps you warm when you have nothing else, but it also keeps you alone. What are you going to do? With the money, I mean." I thought about her question. What was I going to do? I could travel, buy a nicer house, eat in fancy restaurants, live like a king for the rest of my days, but none of that seemed to matter as much as the broken relationship with my grandson, the young man who was so desperate and afraid that he'd lashed out at the person who loved him most. "First," I said, "I'm going to help Marcus. He got himself into some trouble, and yesterday I tried to help him with $20. It wasn't enough then, but it's going to be enough now." "Dad, what kind of trouble?" I told her about the gambling debts, about the dangerous people Marcus owed money to, about his desperate phone call and his cruel rejection of my help. Sarah cried when I repeated his words about keeping my poverty away from him. "He didn't mean it, Dad," she said through her tears. "He's just scared. When Marcus gets scared, he says horrible things he doesn't mean." "I know, baby. I know. That's why I'm going to fix this." After I hung up with Sarah, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, not bothering to turn on the lights. Tomorrow I would go back to Marcus's apartment. Tomorrow I would give him more help than he'd ever dreamed possible. But more importantly, tomorrow I would try to save our relationship before pride and stubbornness destroyed it, the way they'd destroyed my relationship with Bobby. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yesterday Marcus had told me to keep my poverty away from him. Tomorrow I'd be bringing him wealth beyond his wildest dreams. But the real gift wouldn't be the money. It would be the chance to heal the wounds we'd inflicted on each other, to prove that family was stronger than fear, stronger than pride, stronger than the cruel words we say when we're desperate and afraid. If you've ever had to choose between pride and love, between being right and being family, tell me from which corner of the world you're following this story. Sometimes the universe gives us second chances in ways we never could have imagined. I picked up Bobby's letter and read it one more time, focusing on his final words. Do something good with it. Help people the way I should have helped you. Tomorrow I would start with Marcus, my grandson who was lost and afraid and drowning in mistakes, just like his great-uncle Bobby had been 30 years ago. The difference was, I wasn't going to wait 20 years to extend my hand. I wasn't going to let pride cost me another person I loved. The money would change everything, but the love, that had been there all along. I didn't sleep much that second night either, but this time it wasn't because of pain, it was because of possibility. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine how I would approach Marcus. How do you tell someone that you've gone from having $20 to having 68 million overnight? How do you explain that the grandfather they'd rejected for his poverty had become wealthier than they could ever dream? More importantly, how do you make sure they understand that the money wasn't the point, that forgiveness and family were worth more than any inheritance? I was up before dawn again, but this time I made breakfast with real eggs instead of oatmeal, using butter instead of cooking spray, drinking orange juice instead of water. These were small luxuries, but they felt like practice for a life I couldn't quite believe was real yet. At 9 o'clock, Richardson called to confirm that the initial paperwork was progressing smoothly. By tomorrow morning, I would have access to enough money to solve Marcus's problems 1,000 times over. But I couldn't wait that long. Not when my grandson was living in terror, expecting dangerous men to show up at his door at any moment. "Mr. Richardson," I said, "I need to ask a favor. My grandson is in immediate danger because of debts he owes to some very bad people. Is there any way you could advance me $5,000 today? Just enough to get him safe while we wait for the official transfer?" There was a pause on the other end. "Mr. Martinez, I understand your concern for your grandson, but I have to advise caution. Large, sudden gifts to family members can sometimes create complicated legal and tax situations. $5,000 isn't large compared to what I'm inheriting," I said firmly, "and my grandson's life might be in danger. I'll take responsibility for any legal complications." Richardson sighed. "Very well. I can arrange for a cashier's check to be delivered to you this afternoon, but please be careful. Sudden wealth changes people, sometimes in ways we don't expect." After hanging up, I called Marcus. The phone rang 6 times before he answered, his voice groggy and suspicious. "Hello? Marcus, it's Grandpa Joe. I need to see you today." There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable than it had been yesterday. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry about what I said. I was just scared and angry and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that." The apology hit me harder than his cruel words had. This was the Marcus I remembered, the one who'd always been quick to admit when he was wrong, who'd never been able to stay angry at anyone for long. "I know you were scared, son," I said gently, "but I need to see you today. I have something important to tell you. Is everything okay? You sound different." Different? Yes, I supposed I did sound different. Yesterday, I'd been a broken old man, devastated by his grandson's rejection. Today, I was a man with the power to solve problems, to change lives, to heal wounds that had seemed impossible to repair. "Everything's going to be okay," I said. "Can I come over around 3 o'clock?" "Of course. Grandpa, I really am sorry. What I said about your poverty, that was cruel and stupid, and we'll talk about it when I see you," I interrupted gently. "Just try not to worry until then, all right?" The cashier's check arrived at 2:30, delivered by a courier in a white van. $5,000, made out to Marcus Rodriguez. I held the small piece of paper and marveled at how something so light could carry the weight of someone's salvation. But first I had a stop to make. I took the bus to the bank where I'd had my checking account for 37 years, the same bank where I'd deposited every paycheck from the steel mill, where I'd taken out the small mortgage on my house, where I'd opened Marcus's first savings account when he was 8 years old and wanted to save money for a bicycle. Mrs. Patterson, the teller who'd been handling my meager transactions for over a decade, looked surprised when I approached her window. "Mr. Martinez, 2 visits in 1 week. That's unusual for you." "I need to make a withdrawal, Helen," I said, pulling out my savings account book. "I'd like to take out $100. She looked at the book, then at me, then back at the book. "Mr. Martinez, your savings balance is only $43.18. "I know. I want to withdraw $100 from my checking account then." Helen's face softened with concern. "Sir, your checking account only has $12.47. Are you feeling all right?" For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old shame, the familiar embarrassment of being poor in a world that measured worth in dollar signs. But then I remembered Bobby's letter, Richardson's briefcase, the life that was about to unfold in front of me. "Helen," I said with a smile, "by tomorrow morning you're going to have a very different conversation with me about my account balances. But today I just need you to trust me. Can you let me overdraw my checking account by $50? I'll cover the fees." She studied my face for a long moment, then shrugged and processed the transaction. "You've been banking with us for 37 years, Mr. Martinez. I guess we can trust you for $50. I walked out of the bank with $100 in cash and a smile on my face. Tomorrow, I'd probably be asking Helen to help me figure out how to manage millions of dollars. Today, I was still just an old man who'd convinced his longtime teller to let him overdraw his account. The bus ride to Marcus's apartment felt different this time. Yesterday, I'd been carrying my last $20 and a heart full of desperate hope. Today, I had a cashier's check for $5,000, $100 in cash, and the knowledge that my grandson's crisis was about to become a distant memory. But I also carried something else. The weight of a secret that would change everything between us. How do you tell someone that you've suddenly become wealthy? How do you make sure they understand that your love isn't conditional on their gratitude? Marcus answered the door on the first knock, as if he'd been waiting by the window. He looked better today, still thin and worried, but not quite as hollow around the eyes. He'd showered and shaved, and his apartment was tidier than it had been yesterday. "Grandpa," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm really glad you came back. I was afraid that after what I said, you might never want to see me again." I sat down on his single chair while he perched on the edge of his mattress. For a moment, we just looked at each other, an old man and his grandson, separated by a lifetime of different choices, but connected by love that had survived even the cruelest words. "Marcus," I said quietly, "before we talk about anything else, I need you to know that there's nothing you could ever say that would make me stop loving you. Nothing. You understand?" Tears welled up in his eyes. "I don't deserve that. I don't deserve you. Deserve doesn't have anything to do with it. Love isn't about deserving, it's about choosing to care about someone no matter what. Your grandmother taught me that before she died, and I've been trying to live by it ever since." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the cashier's check. "I came here yesterday to give you $20 because it was all I had. You told me to keep my poverty away from you, and that hurt more than I can tell you. But I understood why you said it. You were scared and desperate, and sometimes when we're drowning, we lash out at the very people trying to save us. Marcus stared at the check in my hands. Grandpa, what is that? This is $5,000. Exactly what you need to pay off those men who've been threatening you. His face went pale. 5,000. Grandpa, where did you get $5,000? Did you take out a loan? Did you mortgage your house? Please tell me you didn't do something crazy to get this money. I had to smile at his concern. Even in the middle of his own crisis, even after the cruel things he'd said, his first worry was that I might have hurt myself financially to help him. I didn't take out any loans, I said, and I didn't mortgage anything. This money is mine to give, and I want you to have it. Marcus stood up and started pacing just like he had yesterday. I can't take this from you. $5,000 is probably everything you have in the world. I won't let you make yourself destitute just to fix my mistakes. Marcus, sit down, please. I need to tell you something, and you're going to want to be sitting down when you hear it. He sat on the edge of his mattress, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I could see the war going on in his face, desperate need, fighting against love for his grandfather, the desire to be saved, battling with the knowledge that salvation shouldn't come at my expense. Yesterday morning after I left here, I got a phone call, I began. It was from a lawyer in California. My brother Bobby, your great-uncle Bobby, died 6 months ago. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I know you two hadn't spoken in years, but still, Bobby left me something in his will, Marcus, something that changes everything. I pulled out Bobby's letter and handed it to him. Read this, all of it, and then we'll talk about what happens next. As Marcus read, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief, to something approaching shock. When he finished, he looked up at me with wide eyes. Grandpa, this says Uncle Bobby left you $68 million. That's right, 68 million. Million with an M. Yes. Marcus stared at the letter, then at the cashier's check, then at me. Yesterday you were poor, today you're rich, really, really rich. I suppose I am. He was quiet for a long time, processing what this meant. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. And you still came here. You still wanted to help me even after what I said about your poverty. What comes next will show you the true power of forgiveness and family. If you want to keep hearing how this incredible story unfolds, tap the subscribe button now. It's free, and you'll be with me for every emotional moment that follows. That's what family does, I said simply. We show up for each other even when it's hard, even when harsh words have been said, even when pride gets in the way. Marcus started crying then, not the angry, frustrated tears of yesterday, but the deep, cleansing tears of relief and shame and overwhelming gratitude. And for the first time in 2 days, I felt like I had my grandson back. Marcus cried for a long time, his shoulders shaking with the weight of everything: relief, shame, gratitude, and the overwhelming realization that his life had just been saved by the man he'd rejected so cruelly just 24 hours earlier. I didn't say anything. I just sat there and let him feel everything he needed to feel. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply witness their pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. When his tears finally slowed, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Grandpa, I don't understand. Yesterday I told you to keep your poverty away from me, and today you're sitting here offering to save my life. How can you not hate me? I leaned forward in my chair, wanting to make sure he heard every word I was about to say. Marcus, do you remember when you were 12 years old and you stole that candy bar from Miller's corner store? He looked confused by the sudden change of subject but nodded. Yeah, you made me go back and apologize to Mr. Miller and pay for it with my allowance money. Do you remember what you said to me when I told you I was disappointed in you? Marcus thought for a moment, then his face flushed with embarrassment. I told you I hated you, and that you weren't my real grandfather anyway, because you were just my mom's dad, not my dad's dad. That's right, you said you hated me and that I wasn't your real family. Do you know what I did after you said that? You sent me to my room. After I sent you to your room, I sat in my kitchen and cried, not because I was angry at you, but because I knew you were in pain. Kids don't say cruel things to people they love unless they're hurting inside. I knew that underneath that anger you were scared and ashamed and trying to push me away before I could reject you. Marcus stared at me. I don't remember being scared. You were 12, son. Your parents were fighting all the time, talking about divorce. You were acting out at school, getting into trouble, and deep down you were terrified that everyone you loved was going to leave you. So when I caught you stealing and told you I was disappointed, Part of you decided it would be easier to push me away first. I reached out and took his hand. Yesterday, when you told me to keep my poverty away from you, I heard that 12-year-old boy again. Scared, desperate, lashing out at the person who loves him most, because sometimes it's easier to hurt people than to let them see how much we need them. Marcus squeezed my hand tightly. I was terrified, Grandpa, not just of those men I owe money to, but of you seeing what a failure I'd become. When you offered me that $20, all I could think was how pathetic it was that my 73-year-old grandfather was trying to save me with money he probably needed for groceries. And that made you angry. It made me hate myself. And when we hate ourselves, sometimes we take it out on the people who love us most, because we know they'll forgive us. He paused, fresh tears starting to fall. I was counting on you forgiving me, Grandpa. Even as I said those horrible things, part of me was thinking, Grandpa Joe will understand. He always understands. I do understand, and I do forgive you. But more than that, Marcus, I'm proud of you. He looked at me in disbelief. Proud of me? I'm 28 years old, living in a dump, owing money to criminals because I'm too weak to stop gambling. What could you possibly be proud of? I'm proud that you called me when you were in trouble. I'm proud that you trusted me enough to tell me the truth about what was happening. I'm proud that even when you were scared and desperate, you couldn't bring yourself to take money from your old grandfather without feeling guilty about it. That guilt, that shame you felt, that tells me your heart is still good, Marcus. That tells me you're still the little boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on an ant. I stood up and walked to his small window, looking out at the struggling neighborhood beyond. Your Uncle Bobby made some bad choices when he was your age too. He let pride drive a wedge between us that lasted 20 years, but in the end, he found a way to turn his life around. He never stopped caring about family, even when he was too stubborn to pick up the phone. Do you think I can turn my life around too? I turned back to him. I know you can, but it's going to take more than money, Marcus. Money can solve your immediate problem, but it can't fix what's broken inside. That's going to take work, hard work, the kind that requires looking at yourself honestly and making different choices every single day. Marcus nodded slowly. I know I need help. Professional help. I've known it for a while, but I kept telling myself I could handle it on my own. There's no shame in getting help. Your grandmother went to therapy after her mother died, and it saved her life. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we can't do everything alone. I sat back down and picked up the cashier's check. This money will pay off your debts and give you a fresh start, but I want to make you a deal. What kind of deal? You take this $5,000 and get yourself safe. Pay off these men who are threatening you, and then we're going to sit down together and make a real plan for your future. I want you to go to counseling for your gambling problem. I want you to find a job, even if it's not perfect at first. And I want you to let me help you, not just with money, but with rebuilding your life the right way. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What if I mess up again? What if I take this chance you're giving me and throw it away like I've thrown away everything else? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what family does. We don't give up on each other even when we give up on ourselves. I held out the check to him. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if you start feeling that urge to gamble again, if you start feeling like you're losing control, you'll call me immediately. Day or night, it doesn't matter. You call me and we'll deal with it together. Marcus took the check with trembling hands. I promise, but Grandpa, this feels like too much. I don't deserve this kind of generosity. Deserve has nothing to do with it. This is about love, and love isn't something we earn. It's something we give and receive freely. I smiled at him. Besides, $5,000 doesn't feel like much when you have 68 million sitting in the bank. For the first time since I'd arrived, Marcus smiled too. I still can't believe that's real. $68 million. What are you going to do with all that money? I'd been thinking about that question since Richardson first told me about the inheritance. Well, your Uncle Bobby left instructions about some charities he wanted me to support. I'll probably do that. And I think I'll buy a better house, maybe somewhere with a big yard where I can have a proper garden again. You should travel, see the world. You've never been anywhere except Detroit and that one trip to Chicago when I was little. Maybe I will, but first, I want to make sure my family is taken care of. Your mom could use some help. Her car's been making that grinding noise for 6 months and I know she can't afford to fix it. And there's you. You've already helped me more than enough. Marcus, I'm 73 years old. I don't need $68 million for myself. What I need is to know that the people I love are safe and happy and have the chance to build good lives. That's worth more to me than any amount of money. Marcus stood up and came over to where I was sitting. Without warning, he knelt down and hugged me tightly. the way he used to when he was little and had scraped his knee or had a bad dream. "I love you, Grandpa Joe," he whispered. "I'm sorry I forgot that for a while." "I love you too, son." "And you never forgot. You just got scared and lost sight of it for a minute. That happens to all of us sometimes." We sat there for a while, grandfather and grandson, both of us processing how much had changed in just 2 days. 2 days ago, I'd been a poor old man watching his grandson spiral toward disaster. Now I was wealthy beyond imagination, and my grandson had a real chance at a fresh start. But the most important thing, the love between us, had been there all along. It had survived harsh words and $20 bills and pride and fear and all the complicated emotions that can tear families apart if we let them. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now you take that check and pay off your debts. Then we start building your new life one day at a time. And Marcus, yeah? No more secrets between us. If you're struggling, if you're scared, if you're tempted to make bad choices, you talk to me. That's what I'm here for." Marcus nodded, clutching the check that represented his salvation. "Thank you, Grandpa. For the money, yes, but mostly for not giving up on me, for still loving me even when I said those awful things. That's what grandfathers do," I said simply. "We love our grandchildren through their worst moments, so we can be there to celebrate their best ones." As I prepared to leave, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope for Marcus. Hope for our family. Hope that Bobby's final gift would be the beginning of healing rather than the end of regret. If you've ever received a second chance when you thought all was lost, share with me from which part of the world you're experiencing this story of redemption. The boy I'd taught to plant tomatoes was still there, underneath all the mistakes and poor choices. And tomorrow we would start helping him grow again. 3 months later, I was standing in the backyard of my new house, watching Marcus tend to the vegetable garden we'd planted together. The house was bigger than my old one, not a mansion, but comfortable, with 4 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and enough space for the family dinners I'd been dreaming about. Most importantly, it had a large backyard with rich soil and plenty of sunlight, perfect for the kind of garden I'd always wanted, but never had the space for. Marcus looked healthier than he had in years. He'd gained back some of the weight he'd lost during his worst days, and there was color in his cheeks again. More than that, there was light in his eyes, the same light I remembered from when he was a child, full of curiosity and hope for the future. "Grandpa, look at these tomatoes," he called out, holding up a cluster of small green fruits. "They're going to be huge this year." "That's what happens when you take care of something properly," I said, walking over to join him. "Plants are like people. They thrive when they get the right kind of attention and support." Marcus smiled at the parallel. He'd been going to therapy twice a week since paying off his debts and attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings every Tuesday and Thursday. It wasn't easy, recovery never was, but he was doing the work, taking it one day at a time. "Speaking of taking care of things properly," he said, brushing dirt off his hands, "I got the job." I felt my heart leap. "The one at the community center?" "Yeah, they want me to start Monday. It's not much money, just helping kids with their homework and organizing activities. But it feels good. It feels like something I can actually be proud of." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Your grandmother always said that the most important work we do isn't the kind that makes us rich. It's the kind that makes us useful to other people. Those kids are lucky to have you." Marcus had found his calling working with children who came from broken homes, kids who understood what it felt like to make mistakes and need second chances. His own struggles had given him empathy and patience that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The sound of a car door slamming interrupted our conversation. Through the garden gate, I could see Sarah walking up the path, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen on her face in years. Behind her came her new boyfriend, David, a quiet man who worked as a mechanic and treated my daughter with the respect and kindness she deserved. "Dad," Sarah called out, "I brought that enchilada casserole you like." The money had changed things for Sarah too, though she'd been the most resistant to accepting help at first. I'd had to practically force her to let me pay off her credit card debt and buy her a reliable car. But once she realized that my wealth wasn't going anywhere, that this wasn't some temporary windfall that would disappear as quickly as it had arrived, she'd allowed herself to relax in ways I hadn't seen since she was a young woman. "You didn't have to cook," I said, giving her a hug as she came into the backyard. "I told you I was ordering pizza for everyone. Pizza's fine for the kids, but adults need real food." She looked around at the garden, the patio furniture I'd bought, the small fountain bubbling in the corner. "I still can't believe this is real sometimes. 6 months ago you were worried about paying your electric bill. 6 months ago feels like a lifetime," I agreed. "But you know what? The money isn't what makes this feel different. What does? I gestured toward Marcus, who was now showing David how to tell when the peppers were ready to harvest, having our family back together, having hope again. The money just made it possible to focus on what really matters. As if he'd heard us talking about him, Marcus looked up and waved. "Mom, you've got to see these beans. Grandpa taught me how to build a proper trellis, and they're growing like crazy." Sarah smiled and walked over to admire the garden, leaving David and me alone for a moment. He was a good man, careful and thoughtful in the way he approached both his work and his relationship with my daughter. I appreciated that he'd never treated me differently after learning about the inheritance. He was as respectful and genuine now as he'd been when he thought I was just another old man on a fixed income. "How's Marcus really doing?" David asked quietly. "Sarah worries about him." "He's doing the work," I said. "That's all any of us can do, show up every day and do the work. Some days are harder than others, but he hasn't gambled since we paid off his debts. He goes to his meetings, he sees his counselor, and he's building a life he can be proud of." "And you, how are you handling all this?" It was a good question. How was I handling suddenly being wealthy? How was I dealing with the guilt of having so much when others had so little? How was I managing the constant stream of people who'd suddenly discovered they were my long-lost friends? "Some days I wake up and forget," I said honestly. "I'll be about to make coffee with used grounds or count out exact change for the bus, and then I remember that I don't have to do that anymore. Other days I think about Bobby and wonder what would have happened if we'd reconciled before he died. But mostly I just try to use the money the way he wanted me to help people, to take care of family, to do some good in the world." The inheritance had allowed me to do more than just help my immediate family. I'd started a scholarship fund at the local community college for students from low-income families. I'd donated money to the food bank, where I'd sometimes shopped when times were particularly tough. I'd even gone back to my old neighborhood and quietly paid off several families' medical debts, asking only that they not tell anyone where the money had come from. But the most meaningful thing I'd done was establish the Robert Martinez Foundation, named after Bobby, which provided interest-free loans to people trying to escape gambling addiction. Marcus had been instrumental in setting it up, using his own experience to help design programs that actually addressed the root causes of the problem, rather than just the symptoms. "Uncle Joe!" I turned to see my great-niece Emma running through the garden gate, followed by her parents, Sarah's cousin Mike, and his wife Janet. More family had emerged from the woodwork after news of the inheritance spread, but Mike and Janet were genuine. They'd been part of our lives long before anyone knew about Bobby's money. "Emma, be careful around the plants," Janet called out, but I waved her off. "It's fine, gardens are meant to be enjoyed by children." I scooped up 6-year-old Emma and carried her over to the strawberry patch. "Want to help me pick some strawberries for dessert?" As Emma carefully selected the ripest berries, chattering away about kindergarten and her pet hamster, I felt a deep sense of contentment settle over me. This was what Bobby's money had really bought. Not luxury or status, but the ability to bring family together, to create space for love to flourish, to build something lasting. "Grandpa Joe," Emma said, holding up a particularly large strawberry, "is it true that you used to be poor?" Janet started to shush her, but I held up a hand. "It's okay. Yes, Emma, I used to be poor. Very poor. But now you're rich? Now I have enough money to take care of the people I love. That makes me feel rich, yes. My mom says money doesn't buy happiness." I smiled. "Your mom is right. Money doesn't buy happiness. But you know what it can buy?" "What?" "Opportunities, chances to help people, the ability to fix problems and heal hurts. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it can buy us time. Time to spend with the people we love, time to make up for mistakes, time to build something beautiful." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 6-year-old mind. "Like this garden?" "Exactly like this garden." As the afternoon wore on, more family arrived. Sarah's brother Tom drove up from Toledo with his wife and kids. Marcus's friend Jake stopped by, the same Jake who'd been part of his gambling circle, but was now 6 months clean and working as Marcus's accountability partner. Even Mrs. Patterson from the bank showed up, having become something of a local celebrity for being the teller who'd let me overdraw my account the day before I became a millionaire. We ate pizza and enchiladas and fresh strawberries from the garden. We told stories and laughed until our sides hurt. Marcus played guitar while the kids ran around the yard, their laughter mixing with the sound of the fountain and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. As the sun began to set, I found myself sitting on the back porch watching my family enjoy the life that Bobby's final gift had made possible. Marcus was showing his young cousins how to catch fireflies. Sarah was deep in conversation with Janet about their new book club. David was helping Tom fix a wobbly chair with the same methodical care he brought to everything in his life. This was what wealth really meant. Not the numbers in my bank account, but the richness of these relationships, the abundance of love and laughter and second chances. "Grandpa?" I looked up to see Marcus standing beside my chair, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want some," he said, handing me a cup and settling into the chair beside me. "Thank you, son." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for forgiving me, for not giving up on me, for showing me that family means showing up, even when it's hard." I reached over and patted his hand. "You don't need to thank me, that's what love does. It shows up. I want to be that kind of person," he said quietly. "The kind who shows up for people even when they don't deserve it. You already are that kind of person, Marcus. You always were. You just forgot for a while." As the stars began to appear overhead, I thought about Bobby's letter, about his regret over 20 years of silence, about the gift he'd given me, not just of money, but of the chance to heal what might have been broken forever. What comes next is the most beautiful part of this whole journey, and it shows how love can transform not just individual lives, but entire families. If you want to keep hearing stories that will touch your heart like this one has, tap the subscribe button now. It's free and you'll be with me for every moment of hope and healing that follows. Tomorrow, Marcus would start his new job. Sarah would continue building her new relationship. I would wake up in a house filled with love instead of loneliness. And somewhere, I like to think Bobby was smiling, knowing that his final act of love had created ripples of healing that would last for generations. The money had changed everything, but the love, that had been there all along, waiting for its chance to flourish.